September 14, 1991. Charles Bronson's assistant brought him the morning mail, the usual mix of fan letters, business correspondence, and charity requests. But one envelope caught his attention. It was addressed in shaky handwriting, and the return address was Veterans Affairs Hospital, Long Beach, California. Charles opened it. The letter was brief, written in the same unsteady hand. Dear Mr. Bronson, my name is Robert Coleman. I am a Vietnam veteran dying of cancer at the VA hospital. I have been a fan of yours since I was a kid. Your movies got me through some dark times in the jungle and some darker times since I came home. I know you are a busy man, but if there is any chance you could visit, it would mean the world to me. I do not have much time left. Thank you for everything your films have given me. Robert Coleman, Sergeant, U.S. Army. Charles read the letter twice. Then he picked up the phone and called the hospital. This is Charles Bronson. I received a letter from one of your patients, Robert Coleman. I would like to visit him. Today, if possible. What happened over the next 3 hours became one of the most closely guarded secrets of Charles Bronson's later years, a visit that gave a dying man his final moments of joy and gave Charles something he had not expected, perspective on what his career had actually meant. This is the untold story of the day Charles Bronson spent 3 hours with a stranger, was about to die, and why he never told anyone about it until a nurse broke the silence 10 years later. Robert Coleman was 47 years old in September 1991. He would serve 2 tours in Vietnam in the late 1960s, seen combat, lost friends, and come home to a country that did not want to acknowledge what he had been through. Like many Vietnam veterans, Robert had struggled with PTSD, depression, and substance abuse for years after his return. He would manage to build a life anyway. He would gotten married, had 2 daughters, worked as a mechanic, but the war never really left him. The nightmares, the flashbacks, the constant feeling of being on edge, they were always there. In 1990, Robert was diagnosed with lung cancer, Agent Orange exposure, the doctors said. A delayed consequence of his service in Vietnam, where he would been exposed to the toxic herbicide the military had sprayed across the jungle. By September 1991, the cancer had spread everywhere. Lungs, liver, bones. The doctors gave him weeks, maybe a month. He was at the VA hospital in Long Beach, in palliative care, waiting to die. Robert's wife Barbara visited every day. His daughters, now in their 20s, came as often as they could, but Robert was withdrawing, becoming quieter, more isolated. The pain was constant, despite the medications, and the knowledge that he was dying, really dying, not someday but soon, was overwhelming. Barbara tried everything to lift his spirits. She brought photos of grandchildren he would never meet. She played his favorite music. She read to him from books he would loved. Nothing worked. Robert slipping away, not just physically, but emotionally, giving up. Then, one afternoon in early September, Barbara had an idea. Honey, what if you wrote to Charles Bronson? Robert looked at her weakly. What? Charles Bronson. You have always loved his movies. What if you wrote him a letter? Maybe he would write back, give you something to look forward to. Robert had smiled sadly. Babe, he is a movie star. He is not going to write back to some dying vet he has never met. You do not know that. What do you have to lose? Robert had thought about it. Barbara was right. He had nothing to lose. And writing the letter would give him something to do, some small project to focus on, besides waiting to die. So he would ask Barbara to bring him paper and a pen. And over the course of an afternoon, fighting through pain and medication fog, Robert had written to Charles Bronson. He kept it simple, no dramatic pleas, No long stories about his life. Just the basics. Dying veteran, longtime fan, would love to meet you if possible. He would mailed it the next day, not expecting anything. At most, maybe a signed photo from Charles's publicity team. More likely, nothing at all. 4 days later, a nurse came to Robert's room. "Mr. Coleman, there's a phone call for you at the nurse's station." "Who is it?" He said his name is Charles Bronson. Robert had thought it was a joke, some cruel prank, but Barbara wheeled him to the phone, and he picked up the receiver with shaking hands. "Hello, Robert Coleman?" The voice on the other end was unmistakable, gravelly, distinctive, the voice Robert had heard in dozens of films. "Yes, this is Charles Bronson. I got your letter. I would like to come visit you today, if that works for you." Robert's eyes filled with tears. You want to visit me?" "Yes. What time is good?" "Any time. I am not going anywhere." Robert laughed weakly at his own dark humor. "I will be there at 2 o'clock. See you then." The line went dead. Robert sat holding the phone, unable to believe what had just happened. "Was that really him?" Barbara asked. "I think so. He said he is coming at 2. Today? This afternoon?" "That is what he said." Barbara looked at the clock. It was 11 a.m. They had 3 hours. She immediately went into action, helping Robert shower, shave, change into clean clothes. She wanted him looking his best, not for vanity, but for dignity. If Charles Bronson was actually coming, Robert needed to feel like himself, not like a dying man in a hospital gown. Word spread through the hospital quickly. A movie star was coming to visit a patient. Nurses kept finding excuses to walk past Robert's room. Security was notified. The hospital administrator stopped by to make sure everything was appropriate. Robert sat in his bed, cleaned up as much as his condition allowed, trying not to get his hopes up too high. Maybe it had been a prank after all. Maybe Charles would cancel. Maybe, at exactly 2 p.m., there was a knock on the door. Barbara opened it. Standing in the hallway was Charles Bronson, 70 years old, wearing casual clothes, jeans, a button-down shirt, no entourage, no cameras, no publicist, just Charles. "I am here to see Robert Coleman," he said quietly. Barbara's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, you actually came." "I said I would." Charles looked past her to Robert in the bed. "Is it okay if I come in?" Yes, please, come in." Charles entered the small hospital room. He pulled up a chair next to Robert's bed and sat down. For a moment, the two men just looked at each other. Robert, thin and pale, obviously dying. Charles, weathered and aged, but still radiating that quiet strength he was famous for. "Thank you for coming," Robert said, his voice weak. "I cannot believe you were actually here." "Thank you for the letter," Charles replied. "It meant a lot to me." "My letter meant a lot to you?" "Bronson, your movies have meant everything to me. When I was in Vietnam, we would watch them on whatever screens we could find. When things got bad, when we lost guys, your movies were what we turned to. They reminded us that good guys could win, that strength mattered, that fighting for what is right was worth it." Charles listened quietly, his face unreadable. Robert continued, struggling to find the words. "And after I came home, when nobody wanted to hear about the war, when I was struggling with nightmares and anger and feeling like I did not fit anywhere, your movies were still there. They were something I could count on. Does that make sense?" "It makes perfect sense," Charles said softly. "Can I ask you something, Robert? Anything?" "Your letter said you served 2 tours in Vietnam. What did you do there?" "I was infantry, ground combat. We did patrols, search and destroy missions, pacification operations. All the things you probably do not want to hear about." "I want to hear about it. I was in the service too, Army Air Forces, World War II. I flew missions over Japan. Robert's eyes widened. I did not know that. Not many people do. I do not talk about it much, but I know what it is like. The fear, the loss, the feeling that nobody back home understands what you went through. They talked for the next hour, about war, about service, about the difficulty of coming home. Charles asked questions, real questions, not polite small talk, and Robert answered as honestly as he could. Barbara sat in the corner, crying quietly, watching her husband come alive, in a way he had not in months. He was animated, engaged, present. For the first time since the diagnosis, he looked like himself again. Eventually, Robert's energy started to flag. The conversation was taking its toll. Charles noticed immediately. I am tiring you out. I should let you rest. No, please, Robert said quickly. Do not go yet. I am fine. But Charles could see he was not fine. The pain was evident in Robert's face, the exhaustion pulling at him. Tell you what, Charles said. Why do not I tell you a story? You can just listen. Save your energy. I would like that. Charles settled back in his chair and began talking. He told Robert stories from film sets, working with directors like Sergio Leone and John Sturges, stunts that had gone wrong, pranks played on co-stars. He told stories about growing up in Pennsylvania, working in the coal mines as a kid, the poverty that had shaped him. He talked for almost an hour. Robert listened, occasionally smiling or laughing softly at the funny parts. Barbara listened too, grateful beyond words that this was happening. At one point, Charles noticed a photo on Robert's bedside table. Are those your daughters? Yes, Barbara answered. Jennifer and Michelle, and those are our grandkids. Albert has 3 grandchildren. He will not. Her voice broke. He will not get to see them grow up. Charles picked up the photo and studied it. Tell me about them. Robert, summoning energy, talked about his daughters, their personalities, their careers, his grandchildren's quirks and habits. His face lit up as he talked about them, the one thing that still brought him pure joy. Charles listened to every word, asking follow-up questions, keeping Robert engaged and talking about the people he loved most. After another 30 minutes, a nurse knocked and entered apologetically. I am sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Coleman needs to take his medications and rest. Charles nodded and stood up. Of course. Robert reached out and grabbed Charles's hand. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. This has been... I cannot even explain what this has meant. Charles squeezed his hand gently. It was my honor, Robert. Thank you for your service, both in Vietnam and in all the years since. You are a good man. Mr. Bronson, can I ask one more thing? Anything? Could you sign something for my daughters? So they know you were really here? Charles smiled. Of course. Barbara handed him a piece of paper and a pen. Charles wrote something, folded it, and handed it to Barbara. For your daughters. And for your grandchildren someday. He shook Robert's hand one more time, nodded to Barbara, and walked out of the room. In the hallway, several nurses had gathered, hoping to catch a glimpse of the movie star. Charles walked past them without acknowledging their presence, headed straight for the exit, and left the hospital. The entire visit had lasted 3 hours. No cameras, no press, no publicity. Just Charles Bronson spending his afternoon with a dying man who would have written him a letter. Robert Coleman died 6 days later, on September 20. And according to Barbara, his final days were peaceful in a way they had not been before Charles's visit. Something changed after Charles came, Barbara said years later. Robert stopped fighting the inevitable. He stopped being angry about dying. He said that if Charles Bronson, a man he admired more than almost anyone, had taken time to visit him, to listen to him, to treat him like his life mattered, then maybe his life had mattered. Maybe it was okay to let go. At the funeral, Jennifer and Michelle, asked their mother about the piece of paper Charles had signed. Barbara pulled it out and read it for the first time. To Jennifer and Michelle, your father was a hero, not because of what he did in Vietnam, though that took courage, but because of how he lived after. He came home from war, built a family, loved you both, and gave you the foundations to build your own lives. That is the real heroism. That is what matters. I was honored to meet him. Take care of each other, and remember him always. Charles Bronson. The family kept the note private for years. They did not want to exploit Charles's kindness or turn it into a publicity story. It was personal, sacred, something that belonged only to them. But in 2001, a nurse named Patricia Williams, who had been working at the VA hospital that day, decided to tell the story. She wrote an article for a veterans magazine about the day Charles Bronson had visited Robert Coleman. The article gained attention. Other publications picked it up. Eventually, a journalist tracked down Barbara Coleman and asked if the story was true. Barbara confirmed it, and she shared Charles's note with the reporter's permission. The story spread. It became one of those feel-good tales that people shared on early internet forums and email chains. Charles Bronson visits dying veteran. Most people who read it assumed it was an isolated incident, one nice thing a celebrity had done. But after Charles died in 2003, more stories emerged. Other veterans came forward with similar tales. Charles visiting them in hospitals, Charles attending their funerals, Charles sending money to their families, always quietly, always privately, always refusing publicity. It turned out Robert Coleman was not an exception. He was one of many. A veteran named Thomas Martinez revealed that Charles had visited him in 1987 after he would written a similar letter. Martinez had been recovering from surgery at a VA hospital in San Diego, and Charles had driven 2 hours to spend an afternoon with him. A widow named Helen Fitzgerald disclosed that after her husband, a Korean War veteran and Bronson fan, died in 1993, Charles had sent flowers to the funeral and a personal letter of condolence to her family, despite never having met her husband. A veterans support group in Phoenix said Charles had made an anonymous donation in 1995 to fund PTSD counseling for Vietnam veterans, $50,000, with the single condition that his name never be attached to it. The pattern was clear. Charles Bronson had a special relationship with veterans. He did not just pay lip service to supporting the military. He actually showed up. He visited. He listened. He helped. In a 2004 interview, Barbara Coleman explained why she thought Charles had been so committed to veterans. Charles served in World War II. He knew what war did to people. And I think he felt guilty that he would build a career playing heroes, while real heroes, like my husband, were struggling and forgotten. Visiting Robert was not charity. It was Charles honoring someone he felt deserved honor. It was him saying, "You matter. Your service matters. Your life matters." And for Robert, in his final days, hearing that from someone he admired, it gave him peace. Jennifer Coleman, Robert's eldest daughter, spoke about finding her father's letter to Charles years later. "I was going through old boxes and found Dad's draft of the letter he sent to Charles Bronson. It was full of crossouts and revisions. He would work so hard on it, trying to find the right words, and at the bottom, in Dad's handwriting, was a note to himself, 'He will not respond.' But it felt good to write it anyway. At least someone knows I am here." Reading that broke my heart, because Dad thought he was invisible, thought nobody cared about a dying veteran. And then Charles proved him wrong. Charles showed Dad that he was not invisible, that his life had value, that someone cared enough to drive to Long Beach and spend 3 hours listening to him talk. That note Charles wrote to me and my sister, we had it framed. It hangs in my house, and I tell my kids about it. About the day a famous movie star visited their grandfather and made him feel like he mattered, because he did matter, and Charles Bronson made sure he knew it before he died. Sport Report 4, 1991. Charles Bronson received a letter from a dying stranger, September 1435. 1435. Charles Bronson picked up the phone and said, I would like to visit him today, September 1435. For Charles Bronson spent 3 hours making a man he would never met feel seen, heard, and valued in his final days. No cameras, no publicity, no expectation of recognition. Just a veteran honoring another veteran, a man with time, giving it to someone running out of time, a person with power using it to ease someone else's pain. That is not acting. That is not a role. That is just Charles Bronson, being exactly who he was when nobody was watching. A tough guy with a soft heart. An action star who understood that real heroism was not about guns and fights. It was about showing up for people who needed you. Robert Coleman died knowing Charles Bronson cared. And for Charles, that visit meant something too, a reminder that his career, his films, his presence had mattered to people in ways he would never fully understood. The Death Wish films were not just entertainment. They were comfort for people who felt powerless. They were hope for people who felt forgotten. They were proof that someone was still fighting, even if only on screen. And sometimes, when someone wrote a letter asking for just a few minutes of his time, Charles Bronson fought for them, in real life too. 3 hours in a hospital room, one dying man, one aging actor, and moment of human connection that changed everything. That is not cinema. That is just life, real life, the kind Charles Bronson valued more than any role he ever played.